use of electronic cigarettes.
Yes. Blair, sorry. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I think nobody heard the introduction because I had not hit the right button, and Megan came in and made me hit the right button. So let's start. Let's go back. Talking for a couple minutes. I apologize. I did not. I thought if I hit that little green button, that was what would make it start, but there was a different button that I had to do. So I apologize to those of you who are holding. And if you're hearing me repeat myself, I'm sorry, but I think we have to redo this. This is Kathy Hoke, the director of the Legal Research Center for Public Health Policy at the University of Maryland, Carey School of Law. And today's webinar is going to be an overview of the 2019 Tobacco Control Conference, as well as the session recap from the 2019 session of the Maryland General Assembly. I just wanted to note with respect to the conference that we have reviewed the conference evaluations and any narrative feedback that you provided on the evaluations, and it was incredibly helpful for us to both understand where we did things the best and where we could use some improvement, but it really will help us with planning for the 2020 session, 2020 conference, which we are starting to do now. We were just having a conversation about it before we started the webinar. So if you did not submit comments, but you do have feedback on what you'd like to, particularly on what you'd like to see in the 2020 conference, please feel free to email any of us and let us know so that we can get that on the agenda. And particularly if you have any ideas for plenary speakers, we had really great feedback on the plenary speakers, and so we want to keep that riding high on that. So Brooke is going to give a brief overview of today's webinar, and then she and Blair will take things from there. So go ahead, Brooke.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. We just wanted to provide you a brief overview of what you can expect to hear today. Blair and I will start with the 2019 legislative session update. We'll go over the failed bills and the passed bills. I will then cover a little bit about Tobacco 21, including some frequently asked questions. And just note that that's not all you will hear about Tobacco 21 from us. We're hosting another webinar that will be just solely based on Tobacco 21. That'll be July 31st at noon. And then we're going to conclude with providing a summary of our 2019, our third annual Tobacco Control Conference, which we were really proud of. It was a great success this year. So I will first turn this over to Blair, who will start discussing the 2019 legislative session.
Hi, everybody. So even though it's not law this year, we do like to talk about a few of the bills that didn't pass because it's not outside the realm of possibility for us to see them again in future sessions. And so this first bill is a really great example of that, the Clean Indoor Air Act, Use of Electronic Cigarette Devices Prohibition. So the bill would have added what we, as of October, will be calling electronic smoking devices to the Maryland Clean Indoor Air Act so that they wouldn't be allowed to be smoked in certain public indoor areas. The bill dropped really early and then was withdrawn relatively quickly. Basically, it was just considered not yet ready for prime time, and we do anticipate seeing this again in the 2020 session. Maybe.
All right. The second bill, this was just entitled Electronic Nicotine Delivery Systems, Prohibitions and Requirements. And this bill, it would have done several things, and on its face, they would have been positive as far as the public health community is concerned. They would have added some requirements related to ends packaging and vaping liquid labeling, some other restrictions related to advertising, signage and displays. There was an ID check provision as well. And it also would increase the fines for violations. But this did not pass. This was ultimately withdrawn. And the reason for this, these were strictly, purely legal concerns. There were some problems with this bill. So first, when it comes to the ends, packaging, and labeling, there was a potential federal preemption issue. So the way that the language was drafted, it was possible that the state was actually preempted from doing what it was trying to do. We also had a concern about implied preemption. The concern really was that, this bill would have implemented different laws related to ends all across the board, all throughout the code. And we were concerned that without a clause that specifically said locals can continue to pass law in this area, that a court could potentially find locals are preempted from acting in this area because the state has already, occupied the field to such an extent. The third big issue that they noted was there was a problem with the way that the provisions appeared. So they didn't apply equally to all ends retailers. They only applied to some based on the way that the language appeared. And so ultimately, these were the reasons that the bill was withdrawn. It's not that some of these weren't great ideas, but the way it was being done was problematic.
All right, so the next one, this is, I think, the last one that we're going to discuss that did not pass. This was pharmacist aid for the cessation of tobacco products use, prescribing, and dispensing. It would have authorized pharmacists to both prescribe and dispense tobacco cessation medications, the caveat being only those aids approved by the FDA. So interestingly, during testimony in both the House and the Senate, the Medical Society came out saying that they were opposed to the bill because they didn't like that a pharmacy in one end could be selling tobacco products and on the other end be prescribing and dispensing and selling cessation aids. So a kind of a question that's left in a few people's minds is, were they setting the stage for not just seeing this bill again next year, but perhaps a tobacco-free pharmacies bill next year? So it's definitely something that we're going to keep our eyes open on. Okay, then as far as bills that have passed, the first one we're going to talk about is this Alcohol and Tobacco Commission bill. So this is actually a bill that was about 2 years in the making. So in the 2018 session, there was a task force created and it was actually just an alcohol task force. And they were looking at some of the issues that were discussed in this bill. And then last session, we saw the results of that task force, which then created the commission bill, Senate Bill 703, House Bill 1052. And not only was it an alcohol bill, but actually tobacco and motor fuel had been added to this bill. So the bill itself creates this brand new commission and moves certain responsibility from the comptroller's office to this new commission. Specifically, those responsibilities are related to licensing, and enforcement hearing, and fees. And so the current duties of the comptroller would go to the executive director of this brand new commission that was created. Throughout the course of session, motor fuel was taken out, and so we were left with this bill on just alcohol and tobacco. And so this is a very strong alcohol bill, and a lot of the public health advocates that participated in that task force and in the drafting of this commission bill were strong in the alcohol field. To our knowledge, the tobacco industry or the tobacco public health field was not as involved with this bill. Interestingly, this bill would not take effect until June 1st of 2020, which means that there will be one more legislative session before the effective date of this bill. So it's definitely a possibility that this bill will show up again in the next session and possibly even have something to do with some more tobacco protections within the bill. So it's definitely something that we can keep an eye out for and wouldn't be surprised to see again. Now, this Baltimore City bill, this was one that was obviously specific to Baltimore City, and it actually permits Baltimore City to enforce a law that it actually already had on their books, which was to prohibit the sale of unpackaged cigarettes. So those of us who have been working in Maryland tobacco policy for a while are familiar with the Altatus decision, and Brooke did a really great job of talking about preemption in that previous ENDS bill. But what we know is that a lot of the locals have felt for years that they were hamstrung in being able to create and enforce their own local laws as they relate to certain tobacco control policies. And so Baltimore City decided they wanted to be able to enforce this existing law, and so they took it to the General Assembly and were given that express authority to be able to go back to enforcing a law that they were enforcing before the Altatus decision. So we like to talk about this too because it's probably not only Baltimore City that felt like they weren't able to enforce their laws, and so if other local health departments here on the line have their own laws that they are interested in being able to enforce, it's definitely worth a conversation of whether you want to do what Baltimore City did and go to the legislature and get that approval. And obviously the Legal Resource Center is here and happy to help in any way that we can. All right, and then the last bill that I want to talk about, this is another local bill. This happened in Montgomery County, and it was a Montgomery County Council bill. So it didn't go to the General Assembly. It went straight through the Montgomery County Council, but it's an exciting bill for tobacco. So this prohibits smoking cigarettes and electronic cigarettes in an outdoor service area. It does define the outdoor service area, but basically we're talking about kind of like any outdoor seating or serving area. And then there were two exceptions in the bill, one for golf courses and then one for an outdoor serving area, which really just means a rooftop or a balcony. So you can smoke in those two areas, but otherwise a really strong bill, and it already has taken effect in all of Montgomery County.
All right, Tobacco 21. This is something that I've spoken, I think, with many of you here on the webinar about. Personally, this was sort of a long time coming here in Maryland. So as of October 1, the legal age of sale for tobacco products in Maryland, it will be 21, not 18 years of age. There is, of course, this exemption for those who are on active duty military and are over the age of 18. They may still purchase these products. And I just provided here one recent question that's come up quite a bit is, well, for enforcement purposes, how will a retailer know who's on active duty and who isn't? And so we did some research. We've talked to several people about this, and I included here an image of what's called the Common Access Card. And so this is what needs to be shown to the retailer, to the clerk, when a person is on active duty military and they're trying to purchase a tobacco product. This is what the ID, this is what it looks like. There are many other types of military IDs, but the Common Access Card looks like this. Now, I can say I know that we are in the process of putting together a fact sheet, which will be distributed in the next few weeks, and we're also putting together a toolkit. And both of those will include more information on this, so you will definitely see this again. And I know MDH has also been asked about this question, and they're working to provide information to folks as well. So this isn't the last time you're going to see this. And of course, we're happy to answer any other additional questions related to this. All right, so another piece of the Tobacco 21 bill. This requires the store owner, not the clerk, to be cited for a violation. And that's the Health General 24305 and the Health General 24307 article. You can still cite the clerk or the store owner if you're citing under the criminal law article. But my understanding is that most jurisdictions are using Health General when they do so. So when you do that, just note that it's the store owner, not the clerk, that would be cited and responsible for making that payment. So that's a fairly significant change for logistical purposes for local health department for folks. All right, so the bill, of course, accomplishes other things as well. It changes the term from electronic nicotine delivery systems, ENDS, to electronic smoking devices. And you'll see I'm trying to get in the habit of saying electronic smoking devices now, because that is what these products are going to be called come October 1. ESDs would be the acronym for that. And so it also modifies then the definition of electronic smoking devices, and it changes the definition of tobacco product to include electronic smoking devices. So several different changes here. So first, we're not calling these products electronic nicotine delivery systems. Second, because we're calling them electronic smoking devices, we've also modified the definition. It's actually a little bit broader. And the idea, the advocates have said the idea behind that was to potentially encompass future products that we haven't yet contemplated, to make it broad enough that it would do that. And then third, previously, tobacco products in Maryland did not include these electronic smoking devices, but now they will. They will be considered tobacco products. All right, the other big piece of this we've heard quite a bit about. There was some concern about this and some advocates that really were in favor of this, but the laws that related to purchase, use, and possession. So minors, those under the 18, could previously be cited for purchasing, using, or possessing ENDS or tobacco products, and this was repealed. This is no longer going to be something that a minor, or in this case an 18, 19, 20-year-old, could be cited for. And so the idea behind that is that these laws do not assist minors. There's no link to assisting with cessation of these products. There's just absolutely no research to show that enforcement dollars being put toward these laws are assisting in any way with respect to youth access. And so that was really the main idea behind this. There have been a lot of questions about, well, what can the SROs, the school resource officers, do now? They can't cite students in schools for using, and that's true, they will not be able to cite, but what they can do is if a student is violating a school rule, and you can't use these products on school property in almost every jurisdiction, or in every jurisdiction actually, then they can still initiate a disciplinary action like they would any other kind of school rule that's being broken. So they report it to administration or whatever the specific process is there. So a student may still have to answer for consequences. It just won't be under Maryland law. All right, so a little more on just some frequently asked questions. So what should I, from I guess the local health department perspective, what should I instruct the enforcement officers to enforce? So if you are a jurisdiction and you do not have your own local law, you would instruct them to enforce one of the state laws. That could be the criminal law article or Health General 24-305 or 7. Another question we get is for locals who do have their laws on the books, do I need to change my local law to reflect that the legal sale age is now 21 and not 18? And so the answer is no. If you'd like, you can continue enforcing your law, your local law that says these products can't be sold to those under the age of 18. You can continue to do that. If you don't want to do that, then go ahead and use the state law. And your third option, of course, would be if you want to have a local law on the books that says these products can't be sold to those under the age of 21, then you could go ahead and initiate your process for getting that law change in your jurisdiction. And of course, we're there to help answer any questions about that. Another logistical question we're getting is whether or not the age of use for these purposes of these enforcement operations, these sting operations, do we now need to use 18, 19, or 20-year-olds? And the answer is no. You may, but if you want to continue using your 16-year-olds, you're free to do that as well. Next, I think I addressed this a little bit about whether we'd be offering additional resources, but we will. You'll be getting a fact sheet or from us in the next few weeks, and I know MDH in the next month or so is getting some resources together, and our toolkit will be released likely by the end of July. And of course, we're hosting a webinar and always free and available for other questions that crop up. Because the fact of the matter is we're not on the ground floor. There are some logistical issues that pop up that we may not have thought of that we are certainly happy to look through and find a response for. So is there a grandfather clause? So no, there is no grandfather clause. There are several kind of rumors or mutterings about this floating throughout the state, but there is no grandfather clause. I can guarantee, I can assure you of that. So if you hear that, feel free to tell folks, nope, this is not true. All right, so moving on to the third annual Tobacco Control Conference. This took place on May 14th at the BWI Marriott, and we had about 190 attendees. So our attendance was up significantly from the prior 2 years. And overall, we received some very positive feedback. We really had an incredible lineup this year. We had national speakers, and we also had several of you, probably many of you that are on this webinar now, several of our local partners participate as well, which I think it's very meaningful for other folks to kind of hear what's going on in other jurisdictions. So we had a few keynotes. We always joke about this during the planning process. We don't know how we did it, but we had Mitch Zeller, director of the FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, and then Dr. Brian King. He's the Deputy Director for Research Translation over at the Office of Smoking and Health within the CDC. So they each presented a keynote different times, different parts of the day, and that was really a highlight, I think, for many people to kind of hear what's going on enforcement-wise, what can we expect to see at the federal level. And I know personally, I really enjoyed hearing from both of them. I've heard them speak before, and I'm really glad that some of our local partners who may not have otherwise had an opportunity to hear from them got to do so as well. We had some really great feedback. We also, we had a lunchtime panel where we heard from Laura Hale. She's the Government Relations Director for Maryland for the American Heart Association. And really, along with Jocelyn Collins from ACS CAN, they were the driving forces really behind this Tobacco 21 bill. So they talked a little bit about their experience, Laura talked a little bit about her experience, what the bill does, what it doesn't do. And we also had someone named DJ Wilson. He's the Tobacco Control Director for the Massachusetts Municipal Association. He came and he spoke about some of the enforcement efforts in Massachusetts, and he was spent time talking about Tobacco 21 as well. And Massachusetts is interesting. They were really the first town in the country to raise their age to tobacco 21. And really this kind of started the Tobacco 21 movement. This was back in 2005. And so it was essentially in Needham, Massachusetts, a town. They raised their age to 21. And after 4 years of after it had been implemented, they noticed that the high school smoking rate had decreased by 47%. And so when they compared it to neighboring communities, this was just such a drastic shift that they attributed it to the Tobacco 21 policy. So we really kind of wanted to hear from Massachusetts where it all began, and it was really great to hear his perspective. I would also just say, we'd really be remiss if we didn't reference Bill Wiseman. He was the 2019 recipient of the Joan Stein Leadership Award. This is always the highlight of our day, I can tell you personally, is awarding this to, an individual who exemplifies leadership in Maryland with tobacco prevention and control. Providing recognition to him, a deserving member in our tobacco control communities, and we would just continue to congratulate him. So now, to actually get to what you see on the slide in front of you, we have the 6, what we would call our breakout sessions. So the first 3 we heard in the morning, and so folks had to pick one to attend, and then the second 3, the afternoon. So again, you had to pick just one to attend. And of course, I'm not going to reiterate every last thing everyone said because you'd be here for like another 8 hours, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of who spoke and what they talked about, so that if you want more information or want to reach out to that person and you weren't able to make our conference, or you were there, you just want more information, we can connect you with them and get you what you're looking for. So that first panel, the novel cessation interventions, this was just, we always have a track like this, and we try to keep up with the changing times. But this examined traditional and non-traditional approaches to cessation. So we heard from Kendra McLaughlin. She's the director of health education for the Garrett County Health Department, and she discussed the momentum that they gained and the results they achieved from the PATCH program, that's Pregnancy and Tobacco Cessation Health. We also heard from Dr. Daniel Ford. He's a professor of medicine and psychiatry over at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and he talked about his role in his partnership with MDH related to the e-cigarette referral program. And then we also had Megan Jacobs. She was the product design lead on the innovations team at Truth Initiative, and she talked about national trend data regarding e-cigarette use, and she talked about their new program, This Is Quitting. We also had another panel in the morning about enforcement, tobacco enforcement, and sustaining SINAR success. And this was a range of information related to enforcement. DJ Wilson, who I mentioned participated at lunch, participated here again, and provided kind of a larger scale, kind of broad explanation of some of the enforcement efforts in Massachusetts. We also heard from Sula Lambropoulos. She's the program administrator for SINAR over at MDH, and she talked a lot about the SINAR inspection process. And she also talked about why SINAR compliance, although distinct from the other compliance checks and enforcement efforts that we do in Maryland, why SINAR is important for Maryland's tobacco enforcement efforts. And then we heard from Bonita Sierka. She is the administrator for the Maryland FDA Tobacco Retailer Inspection Program. And she talked about that program and those inspection procedures, and of course that's different from the SINAR program and our other programs in Maryland as well, and she differentiated there. We also heard from Arvind Muthakrishnan. He is an Assistant Attorney General with the Office of the Attorney General, and he provided a brief overview, of course, of the landmark Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary here. So he talked about the different provisions and how it's promoted public health in Maryland. The new and notable awareness campaigns. So this talked about some new innovative marketing campaigns and events. We heard from LaTroya Hester. She is the Director of Communications at NatPen, and she talked about their No Menthol Sunday. That's a national observance day, and it's really an important opportunity to engage faith leaders in their communities in a discussion on how to improve tobacco-related health outcomes for African Americans, and I think that actually just took place just this past week. We heard from Ann Edwards and Emily Gordon. They're research assistants with the Department of Pediatrics over at Eastern Virginia Medical School, and they talked about their work with Virginia's campaign, which is called Rethink Vape. I encourage you all to check that out if you haven't seen it already. It's been a really effective, incredible campaign in their state. And then we heard from Siobhan Chisholm, who he's now with the FDA. He's a health communication specialist, but some of you may remember him from his work in Baltimore City when he was with the health department just a few years ago here. And he talked about their retail education program, This Is Our Watch. So we were really happy to see an old friend there again. So addressing e-cigarettes in schools, we're working with locals on this all the time. I know local health departments are receiving, calls from parents and trying to figure out the best way to address this. Who can they partner with? How can they reduce this? How can they address this issue? And we heard from Barbara White, director of the Cigarette Restitution Fund program and the Tobacco Use Prevention Program at Carroll County Health Department. And she talked about their collaboration with Carroll County schools to provide effective education to students and parents. We also heard from Leah Jaspers. She's a health education specialist for the Maryland State Department of Education, and she gave some information about the Maryland State school system and skills-based health education, what they're doing as it relates to e-cigarettes. We heard from Marcella Bianco. She's a program director. I hope many of you have seen this program. It's really incredible, called Catch My Breath. And it's this innovative program and curriculum where it helps students build their knowledge and their skills. How do they resist media and peer influences related to using e-cigarettes? And then we heard from our partners over in Somerset County and Wacomico County, Tynesa Shields. She's the coordinator of special programs for the Somerset County Health Department, and Rhonda Bryant, the tobacco coordinator with the Wacomico County Health Department. And they talked about their recent success with creating, and they hosted this teen summit for high school students in their region to provide awareness about e-cigarette use. And this was a situation where, they identified a problem and they just wanted to put something together to provide education, information, resources, to a community that needed some help. All right, Blair.
All right, so the innovative tobacco policies, tobacco-free spaces. So we had 4 amazing panelists. No, I'm just kidding. I was one of them. That's why I'm saying that. No, we did have 4 great panelists, though. So first was Scout, who's the Deputy Director of the National LGBT Cancer Project. And Scout discussed smoke-free pride events. We know this is a class of people or group of people who are often targeted by the tobacco and the vaping industry. And so creating these smoke-free pride events has been really helpful in changing that tone. I then spoke about the tobacco-free pharmacy laws that I've been tracking across the country, and Truth Initiative is doing some really interesting stuff around that as well. They have a really cool zombie walk that I talked about in my presentation, so if you're interested in hearing more about that, definitely reach out to me or the Truth Initiative. We learned from Adam Zimmerman, the Vice President of Burn Nest, about how he worked with other advocates in Montgomery County to put that smoke-free outdoors law that I discussed earlier into effect. And then finally, we heard from 2 different members of local health departments, Jane Dawes from Calvert County and Caitlin Kirkpatrick from St. Mary's Department of Health. Did you guys know, I didn't know this, there are certain counties in Maryland, including those 2, that actually take the school is closed on the opening day of the county fair. I was like, what? So anyway, they were talking about how important the fairs are in their counties and how they are working to implement smoke-free county fairs. It seems like such a no-brainer. I was like, wait, they're not smoke-free, but they are not. So it was a very interesting panel.
All right, and then I guess Kathy moderated the Legal Lens panel, and she'll give a brief overview about what we learned there.
So mostly I'm actually going to erase what you learned there because everything changed within a 2-day cycle of what you learned there. 2 of the most significant things that were said by our panelists, Desmond Jensen from the Public Health Law Center, formerly the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, and Micah Berman with the Ohio State School of Law and School of Public Health. We're both our presenters, and actually Micah, interesting, is now spending a year in Uruguay learning about working with them on their tobacco control and prevention. So I'm hoping maybe we can have him back next year to talk about what we can learn from his experiences in Uruguay. In any case, both of them tweeted me within 48 hours of their presentations to say everything that they said is undone. But most significantly, what happened literally on May 15th, the day after our conference, relates to one of the important issues that I know you all care about and that Desmond spoke about, and that is relates to e-cigarettes. first of all, a lot of your feedback from the conference related to, we want more on electronic cigarettes. We need more on vaping. So we hear you. We will do that, and I'm giving you some now. So as you know, or maybe you didn't know, but when the deeming rule, kind of including vape products as well as cigars and hookah, et cetera, as tobacco products subject to the FDA regulation, came out in 2016. It set a deadline for pre-market approval for new products for August of 2016. So that was actually had already been set in the law that August 2016, any tobacco product that was not on the market as of February 15, 2007 would have to be, there would have to be filed a pre-market approval application, meaning there's a kind of a cumbersome, it's a difficult process, but an application would need to be filed to the FDA for the FDA to make a determination as to whether the product could stay on the market. So this relates to products were on the market after February 15, 2007, and existing in the market. Now, if you're making a whole new product right today, you have to do a pre-market application before you can put that out. But if these products were on the market after 2007, but before the 2016 deeming rule, they're quote allowed to be on the market until you file this application for pre-market approval. So then once the application for pre-market approval is filed, the FDA does give some time for the product to stay on the market while the FDA considers the application. And that is expected to be was expected to be a 1-year period of time. So again, initially vape products, there would have to have been an application filed in August of 2016, and then potentially by August of 2017 or so, the FDA would have made a decision on the application and said, yes, this is a product that can stay on the market, perhaps subject to some restrictions, or no, this is a product that may not be on the market and needs to be withdrawn. Of course, we all know that did not happen. Why did that not happen? Shortly after the deeming rule went into effect in May of 2016, the FDA set a new deadline for the applications for these products to August of 2022. Extending by 6 years, frankly, the deadline for filing pre-market approval applications. Recently, or in the last 2 years, in response to the now known vaping epidemic, the former commissioner of FDA, Scott Gottlieb, spending a lot of his resource on this, identifying it as an epidemic, the Surgeon General identifying it as an epidemic, and any rational human being identifying it as an epidemic. And they decided they would pull back on that deadline a little bit. And so they set a new deadline for the pre-market approval applications to 2021. And so while a whole year sooner, they would have to file this application, and then again another year or so for the FDA to consider the application. Many advocacy organizations led by the American Academy of Pediatrics said, no, this won't do, that this has gone on too long. The FDA does not have the authority to continually extend deadlines. The statute said this should have been done in August of 2016. They did not do an official rulemaking or get changes to the statute to extend this deadline. This is unlawful behavior by the FDA. And on February 15, the court ruled that in fact the FDA did act illegally. And so they said in delaying in delaying the pre-market approval applications, the FDA has acted in contravention of its own rules of the statute that Congress had passed, and that they must expedite the deadline now. So where are we? That was, a month ago. Where are we? Well, no applications have been filed, people. Let's not be silly here. But now the parties are, within the court filing, talking about what the new deadline should be. The FDA has proposed that the deadline be, I believe, May of 2020, sometime in 2020. I believe that's May. I believe industry has countered with a different alternative, and I think the advocates, the plaintiffs, would be actually okay with a 10-month deadline, understanding there has to be some lead time for these applications to get done. But the court has not ruled yet what will be the final filing deadline. However, to expedite things, the FDA did have some draft guidance out that was designed to assist those who had to file this pre-market application, and they just recently, in the last 2 weeks, published their final guidance. So now there are essentially instructions for those in the industry on how they should file a pre-market application. So again, we will see. I don't know what's going to happen in court. The trial court is not done yet because it will resolve and try to find or determine the date by which the applications should be filed, or have the parties come to resolution if possible. And there is the potential for appeals. But at least right now, we can, I think, hopefully expect that there's a deadline at some point in 2020 by which these applications have been filed. Again, caveat then, when they get filed, the FDA has, a year or so to review them and make decisions on them. The FDA has indicated that they are prepared and that they have the resource to handle that. There's been some question as to whether if, a monumental number of these applications comes in, how will the agency possibly get the work done? But the agency has said to the court and has said publicly that they will have and they will commit the resources to responding timely to any of these pre-market applications. So short story is, don't know when the deadline's going to be, optimistic that it will be sometime in 2020, but that still leaves virtually the entirety of 2021 before we have agency determination. The agency can make determinations all along the way, or they may do some sort of en masse announcement of application decisions. They're not required to do it one way or the other. So we're going to see these products on the market. For those of you who are toiling away in the fields to try to reduce the, particularly youth consumption of these products, keep at it because they're not going away anytime soon. But as the applications are filed and there are opportunities to express any of your viewpoints to the FDA, LRC will make you aware of those processes. So I know that was a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, but it really changed everything Desmond said at the conference. One other thing that Desmond spoke to some extent was the graphic warnings, and there has been some action in the graphic warnings cases as well. So the FDA had been ordered by a court to submit proposals by August of this year for graphic warnings. A study was due in April of this year. That study was not turned in, and so there is still litigation proceeding, and I believe the agency has filed an appeal. And so with respect to graphic warnings, we are still very much in a holding pattern. There is not a proposal. I don't know if you know, but the previous graphic warnings were struck down as being unconstitutional, and the agency was sent back to do its work, and they're now 5 years behind the deadline of when they were originally supposed to do graphic warnings. And so that hence the court's saying, okay, this is enough, and instituting its own deadlines that the FDA is now missing and appealing. And so we're put off again, potentially another year before even knowing whether and when there's going to be another deadline for graphic warnings. So don't hold your breath, but at least the court engagement has not been positive with respect to the agency just pushing off and extending all sorts of deadlines. And then just briefly on Micah's presentation, a little bit of an addendum there. He talked a bit about the class action litigations and the individual litigation against vaping companies, particularly against Juul. Some of the claims that the plaintiffs are bringing in those cases that are similar to claims that were brought against tobacco companies. And he talked a bit about the similarities and the differences in the cases, as well as in the evidence that underlies the claims and how the cases are proceeding. But he also did speak to, we know what kind of broke a levy in some respect for tobacco control was the master settlement agreement. That was the result of, ultimately all states filing suit against the leading tobacco or cigarette manufacturers, resulting in the Master Settlement Agreement in 1998. And he said, well, but no states have sued any of the vape companies. And on May 16th, 2 days later, North Carolina sued Juul. And I think Blair may have some updates on what else is going on with that litigation. Am I right on that, Blair?
Yeah, in the newsletter, I'll be writing about that.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to call you out on that. We had two conversations about the webinar and the newsletter at the same time, so stay tuned. But there are mounting cases, both private litigation as well as now public litigation against Juul and other vape manufacturers. And so it is just funny that for both Desmond and Micah, within 2 days, court decisions and agency action kind of altered what they had spoke to with respect to the big vape and federal landscape. But not to worry, because we had today's webinar and you just got yourselves updated. So on that note, I actually don't see any questions in the, oh, wait a minute, there is one question in the chat box here. Let me open that, sorry. Brooke, this is for you. Changing ENs to ESDs broadens the scope, but does it also cover non-nicotine ends and e-liquids?
Yeah, so I'm going to double check this, but I believe potentially it could encompass all of these products. It's really broad, and it does have the potential there. Now, most of these products, an issue that we've seen is that they are marketed, this has happened, I don't know specifically in Maryland if this has been an issue, but in other places, where these products are marketed where they say it doesn't have nicotine, and then they go ahead, they go to a lab, they test them, and they do. So it would be really rare that they didn't actually contain nicotine, but this is certainly an issue that we've been asked about, that we've seen several times.
And then kind of the follow-up question there is, are sales of non-nicotine products limited to those 21 or over?
So there wouldn't be a distinction. Oh, yeah. Sorry, what was that?
No, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there wouldn't be a distinction between the nicotine and non-nicotine products if they are all considered tobacco products.
So I have no more questions coming in the question box. So to be honest, my box wasn't operating, but here, now I can open it back up. So if you can open the chat box if you have any questions. For some reason, my question box is frozen, but my chat box seems to be working. You can submit any questions to us. Otherwise, I don't know if you had some closing comments, Brooke, but I will say, number one, if you didn't ask a question today, or if you're trying to ask a question but it's not popping up on my screen, you can always email us. If we flip to the last slide, I think, Brooke, your email address will come up, right? Or the email address, yeah, there you go. You can direct any questions to us at the Legal Resource Center. And, you know, as each of us indicated, there's constant action going on and all of the things that we talked about. And it is hard to stay up on these things, we understand. And so stay tuned for the newsletter. It's going to be chock full of a lot of information. This next one, we're actually happy that it's not a print version because it's so big that we would have trouble sending it out. So there's going to be a lot of information in that. And we will soon release, you know, kind of the dates for our series of webinars and meetings for the course of the next year or so. Any closing thoughts, Brooke or Blair?
No, thank you everyone for joining us today. Like we said earlier on, stay tuned for some additional Tobacco 21 materials. And if you have a burning question, of course, that needs answering in the interim, please feel free to contact us.
Great. Thanks, everyone.